as a hobby. It's not your main job. Because if you've got an employment contract which ties you to working in an office 9 to 5, Monday to Friday,
yeah,
then it clearly demonstrates that crypto is just a hobby. It's not your main activity.
Hello and welcome to Crypto Interviews. My name is Claudio and this is CryptoArchie, the channel that brings you crypto news, reviews, tutorials, and interviews with a focus on the Polkadot and Kusama ecosystems. But today we're going to be talking about something different. We're talking about crypto taxes, something that everyone loves to talk about, right? Because you just love to pay the tax man your fair share of those hard-earned money, right? And joining me today, I've got Mark Quinn, who's actually from the UK, but he runs a business in Portugal, where it's supposed to be somewhat of a tax haven when it comes to crypto, because they do claim that it's a 0% tax on crypto in Portugal, but it's not really like that. So we're going to find out today what are the bottlenecks when it comes to crypto taxes in Portugal from Mark. So Mark, thank you very much for joining. If you could just please quickly introduce yourself to people that don't know who you are.
Yeah, hi Claudio, thank you. I'm very impressed that you said all that in one line, because when I'm doing my YouTube videos, it takes me about 10 recordings to get to this stage. But
Thank you.
yeah, hi everyone. My name is Mark Quinn. I'm a tax advisor and financial planner. I'm qualified in the UK, but I'm based permanently in Portugal. I've been an advisor out here for about 8 years now, advising people that are relocating from all over the world to come and join me in this paradise, and also what's been described as a tax haven, as Claudio suggests. So we can get into the details of if that is true and if you can live here tax-free.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to kick it off with a number of questions. I've actually got the first question for you here. So for example, if I have, we're going to be talking about scenarios here, because this is, in reality, this is how it's going to be for people, right? So let's say I have a full-time job as self-employed and my clients are in another European country. I cash out staking payments. Okay, so I'm staking cryptocurrency. I'm receiving these dividends and in euros, of course. And I would be doing that to a Portuguese bank account. The question is, do I have to pay taxes on those, considering I have a full-time job and this is a side thing that I've got a side hustle where I'm generating extra income?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. So this is a grey area. And I mean, I think it'd be useful to actually say first where we've got clarity, because we have clarity when people are selling crypto. So ignore income for now. If they're just selling crypto assets, and as a general rule, it's going to be tax-free if you're doing it as a private individual. So if you have a main job and you're selling crypto assets as on the side, it's going to be, as a general rule, tax-free. If you're earning income, it becomes a bit more complicated, because it can fall under two categories. It could be considered either a business income, or it could be considered investment income. Now, there's another layer to this, because it also depends on if the person that sent you that question, who's asking the question, is a non-habitual resident, because Portugal has a 10-year tax incentivized scheme. So if you haven't been resident here in the last 5 years, you can qualify for non-habitual resident status, and that gives you certain tax benefits. So, for example, on any staking or yield income earned, that could be tax-free here, but the caveat there is it has to be taxed in the source country. So wherever that income is being paid from, it has to be taxable there. That's the condition for it to be tax-free here.
Oh, I see. Okay, so will they actually ask you for proof of that? Yes, if you get audited?
Yeah, I mean, and in this day and age, we have what's called the common reporting standards. So tax authorities, financial institutions around the world, they're automatically exchanging information with each other anyway. So even if you're not actually declaring the income, the likelihood is they'll know about it anyway before you've even sent them the information.
Okay, I see. Especially in Europe, because of the European Union as well.
Yeah, well, there's a thing called the Common Reporting Standard, and that's actually an OECD initiative, so it's wider than the EU alone, and that's what's responsible for this automatic exchange of information around the world between governments and financial institutions.
Okay, I understand. Thank you. And what about, I mean, you are saying that if you're selling crypto, then generally would be tax-free, but are we talking about how often you sell? Because if you're selling, but you also have a full-time job, it depends how often you sell, right? Because if I'm selling on a weekly basis because I'm generating income in crypto as well, then would that be treated differently?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And there was actually a 2016 ruling in Portugal by the tax authorities. And this taxpayer had brought their case to the financial department and said, am I going to be taxed? And they ruled that if you're a private investor and you're making capital gains, it's tax-free, very clear. It's also not going to be taxed as investment income. But they did raise the possibility for it to be treated as business income, subject to the factors that you just mentioned. How often do you trade? So are you trading daily? Are you trading minute by minute? Are you trading once a year? So that's one factor. The other factor for me would be looking at the balance financially between your main work and the cryptocurrency. So if your main work is the majority of your earnings compared to cryptocurrency, then that works in your favor. And then the third factor is the absolute size of the trades. So if you're earning 10,000 euros in your job, but you're earning €1 million in crypto, again, it's an indicative factor. So
okay,
it's a balance of all these factors.
Right. Okay. So that's very clear then. That's one of the things that wasn't answered to me before when I had this question, because it wasn't very clear. So basically, the place where you're earning more income is the one that takes priority, so to speak, right? For example, if you're earning more from crypto, they would be looking at that as your main income, even if you have another job, right?
Well, it could be, but equally, you could argue that over the past few years, you have normal people that have normal jobs, and they've just been lucky to get into crypto early, and suddenly they're multimillionaires.
That's also true.
It doesn't necessarily make it their main job. So you could still argue that even those individuals could sell out tax-free. And this is why it's so grey. And we still don't have clarification, and a lot of tax lawyers and advisors here are pressing for some sort of clarification on this area, because they're just left in no man's land. We just don't know what to advise people.
So what do you actually do in this kind of situation when somebody reaches out to you and they say, look, I've got this situation, Mark? Do you actually go to the IRS, right? I think they call them the IRS in Portugal.
IRS, yeah, finances.
Yeah. So do you get in touch with them and explain the situation, or do you just do the declaration, or how do you actually work with these kind of people?
I mean, I give them my interpretation of the rules as it stands, and tax is kind of a spectrum between kind of a low risk interpretation and high risk. And I always tell people that if you want to take a cautious approach, then you could always set the tax aside, so you can assume that it's going to be tax-free, but also plan for it to be taxable, so that if it is taxed eventually, you're not in a bad position financially because you've set that cash aside. And in Portugal, we have a 4-year statute of limitations, so the tax authorities can only look back 4 years against any tax unpaid.
Okay. No, that's good. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Now let's talk about another scenario. So this is we're talking about the self-employed scenario before with regards to being self-employed, but your clients being in another country. But now we're talking about being employed in Portugal, working for a company in Portugal, and then you also had some crypto investments, like we were saying earlier. The price has gone up, you made a lot of money, and you decide to sell. In that situation, would that be treated differently than in the first scenario where the person would be self-employed? Assuming you're not on the NHR scheme. Now, assuming you're on the normal tax resident status.
Yeah, I mean, no, it wouldn't. I mean, your employment status doesn't really affect anything directly. The only thing that it would do for me is it would give you more weight to the argument that crypto is just your side hustle, or it's just a hobby. It's not your main job. Because if you've got an employment contract which ties you to working in an office 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, then it clearly demonstrates that crypto is just a hobby. It's not your main activity.
Okay. So in that case, does it definitely mean that you're not going to get taxed?
It doesn't definitely, but I think it's a stronger case.
Okay.
So it's still a grey, but for me, looking at it, I would say you have quite a strong case for it not to be taxed, because if you've got a 9 to 5 job, it will be difficult for the tax authorities to argue that crypto is your main business activity, because you just don't physically have the time for it to be your main business activity if you're working 9 to 5.
Okay, so there's a very high possibility that you can get away with it, and then they would not ask you about being taxed elsewhere because you were in Portugal at the time when you first invested. You can prove your first deposits into, say, Coinbase or Binance, for example, and then seeing the value gone up over time, and then obviously you're cashing out that extra value that you've made. And so now you've got a case where you can say, okay, I've got my job, but I can prove that in the meantime I've made this much money and now I'm cashing that out. So that could work in your favor. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, on the capital gains tax point of view, definitely. On the investment income, so if you're taking it as staking or yield farming, then again it goes back to that grey area as to whether it's taxed as investment income or even business activity. And if you don't have NHR, then it's just taxed at 28% flat.
28%. That's the capital gains tax, isn't it?
That's capital gains tax rate, but that's also the investment income tax rate. So if you get investment income into Portugal or dividends, you pay tax at 28%.
Okay. And what about if you're a trader? So say, for example, I moved to Portugal and my job is dedicated to trading. So I would be paying taxes in that case, right? Because that's one of the rules as per the Portuguese authorities. But the question is, what kind of taxes would I be paying? Would that also be 28% or would that be treated differently?
That would be treated differently because it's your business activity and therefore it's your employment. It's kind of your employment, even though you're self-employed. It's employment income, and therefore it can go up to 48%. So it's scale rates. It starts at 14%, and then I think 28, 35, 40. It works through the banding system.
Yeah, and there's also I forget the name, but there's also a specific amount where you're not taxable. Right, I think it's up to 9,000 euros or something per year. I remember reading about that as well.
Yeah, it's your personal allowance.
Personal allowance,
yeah. Yeah, it's not as high as that, unfortunately. It's 4,104 euros that you can earn tax-free. Yeah.
Okay, so it's not a high amount. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Thank
unfortunately.
you. Now, if you do have a job and you are self-employed and you manage to qualify for the what is it called? NHPR or NHR, yeah.
Non-habitual residence, yeah.
Yeah, so if you're on that and then you're also earning from staking, I know that with the NHR you're paying less tax anyway, but would the Portuguese government then tax that differently in the sense that because you're on the NHR, you'd be on a lower tax bracket, but then you've also got the capital gains tax. So how would they treat that one then in that case?
So for staking and investment income, it would be tax-free here if you're non-habitual resident. But the caveat there is that it has to be taxed in the source country. So if, for example, it's originating from the US, it has to be taxed in the US before it's sent to Portugal. Or it must be taxed in the US. And then if it fulfills that criterion, then it's tax-free here.
Okay, I understand. And if you didn't tax it in the source country, then what would they tax you at in Portugal?
So it's just 28%.
28, the same as the capital gains. Okay,
yeah,
okay, exactly. I understand.
Yeah.
Okay,
the only exception to that is if it's coming from a blacklisted haven, a blacklisted jurisdiction. So certain jurisdictions around the world have a blacklisted status, which means instead of paying 28%, you're paying 35% on the investment income. Places like Gibraltar or the Channel Islands, Isle of Man, places like that.
Okay, but does that mean they would only do that if you're using an exchange, say, for example, a cryptocurrency exchange from Gibraltar, registered in Gibraltar, and your earnings are from that exchange? Is that what would count as the blacklisted country then?
So would that be the same as a source? I mean, you're the crypto expert. Would the source be Gibraltar in that case?
No, the source would be depending on where you're buying it. But let's say, for example, you're selling for euros in Gibraltar on the exchange, or for pounds in that case, because we're talking about GBP. Would that be considered? Would they look at that as if Gibraltar is the place where you've made the money?
My understanding is it's where the actual asset is. So you're trading it through Gibraltar, but if the asset's located somewhere else, it's that destination that's
yeah. And in the case of crypto, we don't know because we don't know where it is, right? Especially if we're talking about Bitcoin. I mean, where it's decentralized, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, it's so hard, and I don't know how they're going to get around that.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. don't think I've got anything else, which, I mean, what you've already said has pretty much covered everything else that I wanted to talk about. So, oh yeah, there was one other one, which is an interesting one. So say, because I've had a few people ask me this actually. So say, for example, I moved to Portugal. I'm a YouTuber like myself, for example, and I want to cash out a lump sum. Can I do that in Portugal? And if I do, will I be taxed on it? Like, let's just a one-off lump sum.
A cash lump sum in disposal of crypto assets.
Yeah. So you can prove that you've bought on a specific date and now you're selling when you're in Portugal, but you're also a YouTuber. So you would have to register as a self-employed, I guess, in Portugal, right? First of all, that would be the first step to do before you even cash out.
Yeah, I think it comes back to our spectrum analogy before. It's a weighing up of the different factors. If you're a YouTuber and crypto is just a secondary part of your overall financial income, then I would say that the argument is you could do it tax-free.
Yeah, but again, it depends on how much you're earning, right? As well.
That's one of the factors. So level of earnings, absolutely. The level of earnings in respect of your other employment. So if it's a big part of it or small part, and then the level of activity. So, are you trading frequently or is it just a one-off event? Because it's quite common. I'm increasingly getting lots of contact from people that, they've just become not overnight millionaires, but millionaires in a relatively short space of time. Yeah. But it's not their main activity. It's just fortune that they've got into crypto early. And they are going to cash out and invest in something more cautious and just cash their chips in while the market's buoyant.
Yeah, no, absolutely makes sense. Yeah. And what about the European regulation on crypto? Have you heard anything about that? Because there were some talks in 2020 about a European-wide crypto regulation. So are you familiar with that? And if so, do you think that could affect Portugal because of this situation?
I'm not sure about the regulations. So there's a new initiative called DAC 8. It's an initiative it's a tax-based initiative to bring e-money and cryptocurrencies within the scope of taxation and to clarify lots of these issues. So obviously this thing is evolving, and I think tax authorities are keen to give clarity on it because they want to try and up their tax revenue.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how they need to make their money somehow, right? And at the end of the day, we have to see Portugal as not being a tax haven.
Yeah.
And what do you think? Why do you think they came up with this idea of 0%? Do you think this was a marketing strategy from their side just to attract businesses or people to move to Portugal, or?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's been very successful. I mean, it was introduced in 2008 and it's attracted lots of people from all over the world. The biggest expat population here at the moment is Brazilian, and then French, and then British, I think, and Irish. But there's lots of expats here. Generally wealthy people coming here, spending lots of money, supporting the economy. So it's been very successful. But as we've discussed today, it's nuanced. It isn't tax-free. When it was originally designed, you could come and retire here and take your pension income tax-free. But that's probably one of the rare exceptions to the rule. Everything else is pretty much taxed. Employment income is taxed. Pension income now is taxed at 10%. Capital gains tax is taxed. So it's not really a tax haven, even though it's made out to be. But the important thing is there are still opportunities for planning. So it's still a very tax efficient place to live if you do the planning, and especially if you can do planning before you arrive here, it becomes even more tax efficient.
So overall, you would recommend people to try and see if they could go on the NHR scheme, right? Because that's the most tax efficient.
Yeah, I mean, we have to do an individual analysis. You can't say NHR applies for everybody. True. But I think there's 2 or 3 people I've met in thousands of people over the last 8 years that it didn't work for. The rest of them, it's all worked for. And what I always also say to people is, even if it doesn't work for your situation now, it's better to have that status because your situation can change in a year or 2 or 3, and then it becomes useful. Because it's a once or none at all opportunity. If you don't get it when you first move to Portugal, you lose the right to apply for it at a later date.
Right. And do you have like a deadline on when to actually apply for it?
Yeah, you do. So if you become a resident this year, for example, you have until the 31st of March the following year to get your non-habitual status.
Okay.
So timing is key.
So what happens if you're earning income in the meantime? Would that be still taxed on the regular income tax as a
No,
resident?
no, it gets backdated because if you arrive now, for example, say if you move to Portugal today
Yeah.
and you start earning money, your tax return isn't due until March next year anyway.
Okay. For the declaration, you mean?
The declaration,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. By that time, you'll have your NHR status granted anyway, and even if it gets granted later in the year, it always gets backdated to the day you arrive in Portugal. So you're
Right.
not losing out on the tax saving.
Right, I understand. No, that's good. And also for the people from the US who are watching and are interested in moving to Portugal, I did see that it's very easy to apply for the visa process to actually move to Portugal as opposed to Spain. In Spain, it is more difficult, but in Portugal, you can even do it online as far as I'm aware, and you can do it in English as well. So that makes it easier for them to migrate over to Portugal.
Yeah, I mean, Portugal offers quite a few different visa options. The most popular are the golden visa, where you can just buy a property. It has to be worth more than 500,000 euros, but that gets you entry into Portugal and access to the Schengen area as well. And the beauty of that visa is you don't have to spend a minimum time in Portugal, really. So you don't have to become tax resident here if you don't want to. The other popular visas are D2 and D7. And in those routes, you have to become tax resident here. So it's you just have to do a careful analysis as to your situation, if it's going to benefit you or not.
Right, right. No, that's good. Thank you very much, Mark. I really appreciate you answering all these questions and clarifying the situation. We are
You're
still in the
welcome.
gray area, but at least you clarified a lot of the stuff, a lot of the doubts. So hopefully, the viewer, can also understand it better. And if anyone wants to get in touch with Mark Quinn, you can find all the details from his website, and also on his website you'll be able to get the phone number, get in touch with him, or his email address, both in the description of this video and also in the pinned comment. So do check out Mark if you want to get in touch with him, if you need to take advantage of any kind of service in relation to taxes or anything else. It doesn't have to be crypto, right? You also do other kinds of financial services.
Yeah, absolutely. Just general tax planning and investment advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Thank you very much, Mark. And thank you for watching the video. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.